Hello lovelies, in this video we're going to be going through your AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2, the paper that we've written for 2024. Now, what I want you to pay attention to in this question in this paper is how we've structured our answers. So look at the balance of A1, A2, A3, how we've structured things, how we're showing off to the examiner in our long responses, that we really know what we're talking about. So it's not just the knowledge and the content that we're teaching you here, it's the exam skills as well.
Welcome to the AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2 Topics in Sociology predicted paper for 2024. So we will be looking at two options in this paper. Section A will cover A2, families and households. Section B will cover B1, beliefs in society. Just a few reminders before we get going looking at these predicted questions, mark schemes and model answers then. You do have 2 hours allocated to complete paper 2, exactly the same as paper 1 and paper 3. And you're advised to split that time down the middle. So spend 1 hour completing families and households and 1 hour completing beliefs in society. There are no optional questions on this paper, so you do need to complete all 3 questions for section A and all 3 questions for section B. With regards to just how you should spend that time then, in section A and section B, the question types are identical. You will get a 10 marker, a 10 marker with an item, and a 20 marker with an item. As always, you're advised to spend around about 15 minutes per every 10 marks. So you can see there on that section A, 15 minutes for your first 10 marker, 15 minutes for your second 10 marker, and 30 minutes for that 20 marker. Timing is definitely a very real issue on this exam paper for lots of students, and I think that's basically a consequence of the fact that you don't have any of those 4 or 6 mark shorter bullet point style questions, and in fact every single question on this paper will be answered in continuous prose. You will be writing 2 full paragraphs for each of those 10 markers and then also constructing full essay style answers for the 20 markers. And this is something that has actually been noted on AQA examiner reports, especially with regards to question 6, which students quite often underperform on compared to other questions, which is not potentially a consequence of the knowledge or the skills required within that 20 marker on beliefs, but potentially more to do with the fact that by the time you get to that last question, time really is very pressured. So it's up to you going into this exam with that in mind to decide whether you might like to attempt your 20 markers before your 10 markers. If you are someone that struggles with time management in an exam, that could be a worthwhile activity, just because obviously there are such a higher tariff of marks available there. For the purpose of this video walkthrough though, I will be attempting the questions in the order that you will see them in the exam. Starting with families and households, we will go through the predicted questions, we will then have a look at a mark scheme and then a top band answer to match that mark scheme. So let's get going. Section A. Topic A2, families and households. Outline and explain 2 ways the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK. 10 marks. So to remind you straight away, 15 minutes is how long we are going to allocate for this question because it's a 10 marker. We are going to use a peel writing method twice, and we are going to separate our peel paragraphs, that's point, evidence, explain, link, with a line through the middle so the examiner can see very clearly that we are doing exactly what's required in the question, i.e. providing 2 separate ways. In this case, to understand the way the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK. Also note there that we're not advising you to evaluate on this question. There simply isn't time, and evaluation is not a skill that appears in the top band on the mark scheme, which you will see in a second. Finally, just also be prepared on this question to have to show a link between 2 topics that you have probably studied separately within the overall topic of families and households. So here you have an example of the changing position of women, which you have likely learnt about with regards to liberal feminism, with regards to the symmetrical family, with regards to the Equal Pay Act. And you are being asked to now show the link between that subtopic and marriage within the UK and all the changes that you have learnt about within marriage in the UK, such as marriage rates declining. So that is a very typical AQA style question when it comes to this first 10 marker, so do be prepared for that. You are going to have to think on your feet slightly on the day. Good practice would be taking several different subtopics that you have learnt about for families and households, such as social policy, such as childhood, such as demography, and applying them to each other to see if you can actually make those links quickly. Let's now have a look then at the mark scheme. So if we just have a look at that 8 to 10 mark level descriptor there then, and you will be providing 2 ways the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK with good knowledge in both points. So fairly straightforward what the examiners are looking for here, exactly what we were discussing previously. 2 ways that are clearly identified and clearly separated, and both of those ways are going to make the link between the changing position of women and the effect that that has had on marriage, whether that looks at marriage rates declining, increasing, or simply changing, but that is going to be very clear to the examiner. Good knowledge in sociology is always going to look like key concepts. It's always going to be you including examples as contemporary as is possible. It's also going to be you identifying sociologists and adding some theoretical knowledge where able to as well. Next bullet point down identifies analysis as being detailed and developed in both points. So to get into that top band, not only do both of your points have to be correct and well linked, you also need to make sure that they are both well analysed. That is the bit that a lot of students fall down on in this particular outline and explain question. It's the real reason between students falling into the 4 to 7 mark band and the 8 to 10 mark band. So analysis is making sure that all of your knowledge clearly directs the examiner to show that you understand how this affects society and what it tells us about society, what the significance of it is, rather than you just providing almost like a descriptive list of ideas. If you have a look at that example sentence, the changing position of women has allowed women to achieve similar economic success to men through laws such as the Equal Pay Act. This means that women no longer need to get married in order to support themselves financially. This has led to falling marriage rates in the UK, with more couples choosing to cohabit, according to Chester. So just within that couple of sentences, you've got a specific example, such as the Equal Pay Act. You've got that lovely little phrase, "this means that," which shows the examiner that we are applying some analysis. You've then got another phrase that I absolutely love, "this has led to," showing further analysis. And then finally, a key concept in cohabitation and a sociologist identified with that. The key differences between the 4 to 7 mark band and the 8 to 10 mark band are the level of detail in your analysis and in your knowledge. This will just be reasonable if it falls into the 4 to 7 mark band. And the other way an examiner will distinguish between a 4 and a 7 and an 8 to 10 mark answer is whether you have been able to do this once in good detail or twice. So if you provide one really fantastic paragraph explaining how the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK, you are likely to be able to achieve up to around about 6 marks for that answer. Let's have a look then at some suggested content. Have a look at a top band model answer. One way the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK is that many women are choosing not to marry at all now, which means marriage rates are dropping. The last UK census confirmed this, as it revealed that in 2021, individuals were 44% more likely never to have married compared with those in 1991. This may be because women are now more able to support themselves financially due to changes in the law such as the Equal Pay Act, meaning women can realistically expect to earn the same wages as men. In the past, women were much more likely to not work or be in low-paid employment, meaning they needed to marry to be economically supported. Another way the changing position of women has affected marriage in the UK is that women are marrying at a later age. For example, the average age for first-time marriage has increased in the UK to 35 years old for a woman, which has been steadily rising since the 1970s, when 75% of women were married by the time they were 25. This is arguably because of the feminist movement and the changing attitudes towards female independence. As women gain more education and employment rights, feminist movements such as radical feminism emerged, which stated that marriage was a patriarchal institution that oppressed women and therefore advocated for men and women to live separate lives. Okay, so what you can see in that first point there then is straight away in the first sentence, the link is made between the changing position of women and marriage in the UK. And here that link is regarding marriage rates dropping. That link is then supported with some fantastic contemporary evidence in the form of the UK census. And I really would recommend, before you go into the exam, spending some time going through that 2021 UK census, because there is a wealth of examples for sociologists and for your AQA sociology exam. You've got loads of lovely statistics about families and households. There's information regarding people's religious beliefs, and also just some really really nice demographic trends in modern UK society. So that statistic is then compared to a statistic in 1991, which very clearly shows very quickly that there has been this drop in the number of marriages or those getting married. What we then do is apply some explanation. Here we are using social policy as that explanation. And again, the Equal Pay Act is a fantastic bit of legislation to go into the exam thinking, if I ever talk about the changing position of women, I am going to support that with the use of the Equal Pay Act because it means it made it more worthwhile for women to work. Another key bit of social policy that you can include with that kind of theme is the Sexual Discrimination Act. Again, makes it more worthwhile for women to work because they are supported by the law. And if we have a look at that second paragraph then, you'll see exactly the same structure applied here. So straight away I am letting the examiner know that I understand the link between the changing position of women and here that change is women delaying marriage, women getting married at a later age. Once again, I've used that same structure. I've provided a statistic to support that. And again, go into the exam knowing a handful of statistics like this off the top of your head around marriage and around divorce. Here we've got the age that women are actually marrying at as increased to 35 years old for a woman. And here, where we've gone for our explanation, we have drawn upon theoretical knowledge. So, just like you can always use the Equal Pay Act if you're talking about the changing position of women, so can you also talk about the importance of feminism as a movement that came about from the 1970s, giving women much more knowledge about their own rights. And here we talk about how that led to this radical feminist movement, a little bit more extreme than your sort of average feminist, your liberal feminist in the 1970s, who actually opposed the idea of marriage altogether, regard it as a hierarchical, patriarchal institution whereby men are always going to be exploiting women in the sense of families and households for things like their domestic labour. Read item A and answer the question that follows. Item A. The nuclear family is a significant feature of many societies. Marxists view the nuclear family as a negative structure, helping to maintain the status quo. Feminists view the family as supporting the patriarchy. Applying material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which the family may act as an oppressive force in society today. 10 marks. Reminder, it's a 10-mark question, so we are going to be spending approximately 15 minutes reading the question, reading and interpreting the item, and then answering with 2 PhET paragraphs, point, evidence, explain, link, and evaluation on this one if we can, because it is an analyse question and it has got an item. The other reminders we need for this question type is that we must find the points for both of our paragraphs from the item that we have been given. So it's one of these questions where we are looking for hooks. So you need to read the item and highlight 2 very separate hooks that you are happy to write a paragraph about. If you don't use the hooks and you decide to just use your own knowledge, maybe you decide to use a different theoretical perspective when understanding if the family is an oppressive force, then you will be capped at around about 4, maybe at a push 5 marks out of 10. And when it comes to the question, there is a key term in there that we need to understand, and that is oppressive force. So if we ever see this in a question, it is basically arguing that whatever structure you are looking at, in this case it's the family, is a negative structure in society that inflicts harsh treatment on its members. Maybe it's exploitative of specific members within the family. In the case of this question and within the family unit, that is normally going to lead you to thinking about Marxism as a conflict theory, where we are looking at the working class being exploited within the family, and then also the feminist argument, where we are looking at, in particular, women being exploited within the family. 2 of the things I would want you to focus on when it comes to this question, though, you also need to focus on that today word at the end there. That often helps us out with our evaluation, because even if we are applying something like Marxist theory to argue the family is oppressive, can we still be certain that that is applicable today when we are now aware of family diversity and maybe the lower significance of the nuclear family? And then also the other thing that I would want you to focus on is that term family as well. You need to make sure that you define which type of family you are talking about. So obviously the idea of the family being an oppressive force might be different whether you are in a single parent family, whether you are in an extended family. The term nuclear does actually appear in the item, so that gives us a good hint about the type of family structure we are going to be talking about. And in terms of interpreting the item then, there are two theories that are specifically named, and there is a hint at what both of those theories argue about the way the family may be oppressive. So the sentence where it says Marxists view the nuclear family as a negative structure, helping to maintain the status quo, is an idea for one of your hooks, and then you've got feminists view the family as supporting the patriarchy as another one of your hooks. So you are going to ideally write two paragraphs, and both of those paragraphs are going to start with as shown in item A and a quote directly taken from item A. So let's have a look at the mark scheme. So if we just have a look what is required there in the 8 to 10 mark level descriptor, two ways clearly developed from the item. So we've already discussed we are going to evidence that to the examiner by ensuring that we write two PhET paragraphs, and both of those paragraphs are going to include specific reference to the item, literally saying as shown in item A, and we are going to try and quote directly from the item as well. Just 2 or 3 words from the item in your quote is absolutely perfect, and we are going to make sure that those 2 points are separated clearly. I would suggest leaving a line between both of your paragraphs, and with regards to good knowledge in both points, as we've discussed previously, we need to ensure that that has a variety of key concepts, that we are referring to specific sociologists where appropriate, and that we are analysing, as it says in the next bullet point, those key points. We are using phrases like this is significant because this may lead to, as a consequence of, this means that. All of those lovely little phrases that allow you to develop your argument. Specific examples also really helpful to get into that top band as well, particularly if you can ensure that those examples are very contemporary, and then you are also making sure that you are referring to the today part in the question. And then finally, evaluation of both points makes the most sense to do that at the end of both of your paragraphs, and you are going to make sure that you don't just provide general juxtaposition evaluation to get into the 8 to 10 marks, i.e. just saying this is what a functionalist thinks about the family. You can create debate through other theories like functionalism, a consensus theory, but you need to make sure that you tailor that evaluation to the specific point that you have raised with regards to the family acting as an oppressive force. So to just give you an example of what I mean there, if you were going to argue that feminists see the family as an oppressive force because inevitably women end up carrying out more of the domestic labour within the family, you would then need to respond to that specifically through functionalism and argue that a sociologist like Parsons would view that as women acting out their biological, natural expressive role, and that actually men are just biologically more inclined and better at carrying out a breadwinner role to support the family financially. And the real difference between you falling into that 8 to 10 mark band and the 4 to 7 mark band is one of two ways. Have you, number one, been able to provide two reasons that are both developed from the item and that specifically answer that question of whether the family is an oppressive force? And then finally, is your knowledge good, very good? Do you have loads of key concepts and sociologists and examples? Well, then you should get into the 8 to 10 mark band. Or actually, is your knowledge just reasonable? Are you just able to add a couple of sentences of explanation, for example, for each of your points? Let's have a look at a top band model answer. Applying material from item A, analyse two ways in which the family may act as an oppressive force in society today. 10 marks. As shown in item A, Marxist sociologists argue that the nuclear family remains an oppressive structure in capitalist society that merely supports the status quo. This means that the nuclear family is a tool used by the ruling class to ensure that they maintain their wealth and keep the proletariat exploited and poor. Engels argued that the idea of a nuclear family simply emerged to ensure that wealthy males who owned property could ensure that their wealth was passed down to a biological heir, as they could be certain of their child's paternity, as women were forced into monogamous relationships. Not only does this act as an oppressive force in ensuring that wealth is maintained only by those who own the means of production, but it also oppresses female sexuality, as they are controlled to produce children. However, functionalists such as Parsons would argue that the nuclear family does not oppress the proletariat and instead benefits all its members who are able to carry out their biological functions, with women naturally suited to carrying out an expressive role. So, you can see in that first paragraph, I am referencing my hook from the item straight away. That first little phrase as shown in item A. Really useful way to show the examiner that I have done what you have asked me to and I have taken a hook successfully from the item. Then we go into a little bit more detail about that hook. So you can see there I have also just chosen a small section of the item to quote that argument about it supporting the status quo. If you are not sure on that concept or term status quo, it really just refers to everything being kept the same. And in this instance, being kept the same to support the bourgeoisie. What you can then see is that phrase, this means that. This shows the examiner that I am going to now analyse my hook from the item and add some extra sociological knowledge. And I do that through introducing Engels. Engels really is the key Marxist sociologist to provide for the examiner when you are writing about families and households, just because he was so interested in nuclear family structures. So as you can see here, we're just going for that classic Engels argument that the nuclear family is merely a tool to ensure that redistribution of wealth does not take place as soon as the bourgeoisie started to own more property and wealth. Also, what you can hopefully see there is the clear line of evaluation starts with that little word however again, which is a really important and useful way to show the examiner that you are now criticising. And here I have taken again a specific functionalist sociologist, Parsons, to create debate between the two theorists. And I have not just given some general argument about Parsons, I have tried to argue specifically about the point that Engels has made and said, hang on a minute, Parsons would argue this is not about oppressing female sexuality. This is about women doing what they are biologically supposed to do. Let's have a look at the second paragraph. Another way the family acts as an oppressive force in society, as shown in item A, is by supporting the patriarchy. Radical feminists argue that the nuclear family supports the domination of men over women and is a key institution in all patriarchal societies. This is because men are granted higher status within the nuclear family and exert their authority through things like domestic violence. Moreover, they argue that men benefit from women's unpaid labour through domestic chores and childcare. Greer argues that in order to overcome this oppression, women should live in all-female households and advocates for political lesbianism. However, liberal feminists argue that there have been considerable changes within the nuclear family to improve women's lives, such as women taking on more paid employment, creating dual earner and more symmetrical nuclear families. So once again, I leave a line between one paragraph and the next to show the examiner that I am now applying my second point, and I'm starting in exactly the same way again, showing the examiner I am pulling an idea from the item. This time I am quoting supporting the patriarchy. So I've already used my Marxist argument. Now it makes sense to address the second part of the item, move on to my other conflict structural theory, which is feminism. What I don't do, however, is just generalised feminist ideas about how the nuclear family may be patriarchal in general. What I do is make sure that I am able to create some debate between the different branches of feminism. So I'm not just viewing all feminists as one homogenous group. I also make sure that I mention specific feminists such as Greer, and I've got a nice key concept in there, political lesbianism, to just support the idea that actually there is a solution to this nuclear family patriarchal dominance. However is my key word again to show the examiner that I am now moving on to my evaluation. You're not going to get extra marks in this exam, by the way, from using more fancy structure or language. I think it's just about signposting it as easily as you can to the examiner. What you're going to pick up the marks for is providing fantastic evaluation. And here what I have done is created debate between two branches of feminism. Liberal feminists basically argue that radical feminists don't take account of the changes that have already taken place within the family. It's that key argument that we use all the time about the changing position of women, i.e. women may not have a completely equal status to men in society according to liberal feminists yet. However, we can't forget the changes in the law that have taken place, like the Equal Pay Act, that have certainly had an impact on women's lives within the nuclear family. Read item B and answer the question that follows. Item B. Social policy refers to plans and actions taken by government and can affect families and households in many ways. Sociologists disagree on the purpose of this. New right sociologists view most social policy negatively, as it can create, in their view, a dependency culture, whereas Marxists argue it serves to maintain the status quo. Applying material from item B and your own knowledge, evaluate the impact of social policy on families and households in the UK today. 20 marks. As usual, to just remind you of your timings and structure for this one then. So 20 markers, we are going to allocate around about 30 minutes, which includes time to read the item, interpret the item, plan an answer, and then also produce an essay question. So timing is tight on this one. In terms of the structure, I would recommend, because timing is so tight, to not bother with an introduction where it is going to be pretty difficult for the examiner to be able to credit you with any material, and for you to go straight into your peely paragraphs, point, evidence, explain, link, evaluation, because this is where you are going to be able to pick up the most marks when we have a look on the mark scheme in a second. You will want to also include a short conclusion at the end where you do reach a decision on the impact of social policy on families and households today. Does it still have a significant impact, or is that impact becoming less and less significant over time? With regards to the content on this essay then, I will say that I think social policy in families and households is probably the topic that most students enjoy the least or find the most difficult when it comes to extended writing. And that's probably because when it comes to social policy, you have to have some understanding of politics and really, to help you out, some interest in contemporary politics. Just to point out again to you, there is that word at the end of the question, the very last word, today, that will appear in an awful lot of your 20 markers for AQA across any of your topics, 20 or 30 markers. And really, you need to make sure at some point in your essay, you are ensuring that you are addressing that word through the use of very contemporary examples. For this question, that will be specific types of social policy that may have taken place in the last few years, but also some more contemporary perspectives. And for most essays, postmodernity will be the way to go to achieve that. With regards to the rest of the content for this essay then, you are reminded that item B is your stimulus. It has been provided by the examiners to give you some guidance on the types of knowledge that they are expecting to see and that will be mentioned within the mark scheme. So you are not going to just rely on information from the item like you would on your 10 markers with an item. You are going to use this as a springboard, as some stimulus to get your sociological ideas going and to act as that kind of safety net or assurance that what you are writing about is going to be on the mark scheme. So within this item, you can see that there is reference to debate about social policy. It says sociologists disagree on the purpose of this. That means that you know in this essay that you are going to have to write from the perspective of several different types of sociological groups. That might be from functionalists to Marxists to feminists. You then actually get the new right specifically mentioned. If a sociological theory is mentioned in the item, 100% you need to write at least a paragraph about it in your essay. And then also you've got Marxists at the end there. Once again, just confirming for you, there is another sociological perspective that I need to make sure I write at least a paragraph about. And as I've already mentioned with social policy, you need to have specific examples of policy that has changed family life linked to each of your theoretical perspectives. But what you also need is contemporary social policy examples that you can show the examiner you are able to become the sociologist and understand how each of these theoretical viewpoints would see that potentially welfare benefit or policy around gay marriage. So taking all of that on board, let's have a look at the mark scheme. Okay, so let's have a look at these 17 to 20 marks level descriptors then. There's nothing here that you won't have seen before when it comes to sociology essays. I suppose the difference with this 17 to 20 mark band is you are so consistently brilliant the whole way through your essay. It is a very difficult band to get into on these sociological essays. A reminder as well, in previous years, if you've dropped down into the band below and got the top of that band, you can just about still get your A star grade. Obviously, that's dependent on grade boundaries, which are changing year after year. But with regards to the 17 to 20 markers, then knowledge is almost always detailed, conceptual, and analytical. So what do the examiners mean by that? Well, you ensure that your knowledge includes key examples. Those examples will be contemporary. You ensure that your answer is littered the whole way through with concepts. I've said it previously, concepts are more important than individual sociological names in this essay. So you are using the sociological language. There's one in the item mentioned as dependency culture. The whole essay is littered with those, and you are able to define and apply them to the question confidently throughout. Your work is also analytical, so that means within your paragraphs you never drift off into description that doesn't stay focused on answering that question. You always ensure when you make a point, you show the consequences or the way that that point leads to another thing occurring in modern society. Your explanation and evaluation is highly relevant. So when it comes to these questions, they are often quite broad in the exam, and you've got the kind of room to be able to bring in the knowledge and the key points that you're most comfortable with. But in that 17 to 20 mark level descriptor, you are going to ensure that you have selected the best, most relevant explanation. And exactly the same for your evaluation as well. You're going to select that carefully so you are avoiding general criticisms from one theory to another. You are making sure your evaluation directly addresses the point that you have made. And you can see also there using a number of theoretical perspectives. So you would want to be, addressing conflict versus consensus, structural versus bottom-up approaches to make sure you've got the breadth of perspectives there too. Where it then says sociological conclusions will be reached, you will be ensuring this takes place throughout the whole essay, maybe in that link bit of your paragraphs, maybe also that short conclusion at the very end of your essay where you actually do answer the question. But please do ensure those conclusions remain sociological, which means that you don't just give your viewpoint, your opinion, which I have seen students do on several occasions. You make sure that even that conclusion is argued through maybe a theoretical framework, or maybe you point out the most conclusive piece of evidence to support the overall idea within the question. You've got an example there of having to create debate between the new right, Marxism, functionalism and feminism to get into that top band. I would always recommend, if you have an essay on social policy, to include quite a large chunk of your essay on new right ideology. And that's really just because they have so much to say about social policy, so much negativity about social policy, but also they have had such a huge impact on the social policy that has impacted families and households in the UK, right from Margaret Thatcher's government through to modern day politics as well. There's some examples of concepts there like dependency culture and perverse incentives. Again, if we are talking about modern day social policy, you have to be confident in understanding that new right ideology about why social policy is a negative force potentially for families and households in the UK. And then really, if we are considering the difference between the 13 to 16 mark band and 17 to 20 mark band, you are still going to be producing a good solid essay within 13 to 16 marks. It is still going to be well structured. The main difference for me from an examiner's perspective is that second line down. The answer may have good range or a good level of detail. So this is where, if you fall into 13 or 16 marks, it is very likely that you have either been able to refer to all of those theories, but you haven't been able to do that in a good level of detail, i.e. using the PhET structure. Or it could be that your answer has a fantastic level of detail throughout, littered with key concepts, loads of sociological knowledge, but you are only able to, maybe because of a time constraint, actually apply this to 2 theoretical perspectives or 3 theoretical perspectives, and therefore you don't include all of the knowledge required to get into the top band. So let's have a look at a top band model answer. Firstly, the new right are highly critical of most social policies relating to the family, as they claim it undermines the significance of the nuclear family in society and encourages an increase in single parent households. So straight away there, I have let the examiner know that I understand the new right political perspective on social policies. The reason why I've mentioned the new right first is because, number one, the new right are mentioned first within the item, and I really do think it's a good idea to structure your 20 markers focusing on the item first. You know then 100% that the ideas you're including will be on the mark scheme, but also because, as mentioned previously, whenever we are writing about social policy, the new right are one of the most significant theoretical perspectives because they have so much to say about social policies, but also because they have been so influential, the most influential theoretical perspective when it comes to actual social policy on families within the UK in the last 30 to 40 years. So they claim generous state interventions such as child tax credits, council housing and universal credit creates a dependency culture as shown in item A. So straight away there, I am also providing specific examples of the types of social policy that the new right are negative about, with reference to a concept in the item. What I need to do is also make sure that I define these concepts. Murray argues that these benefits also offer perverse incentives, that is, they reward irresponsible behaviour such as the breakdown of the family unit. For example, Murray argues the growth of lone parent families has been worsened by welfare creating dadlessness, dysfunction and divorce. I absolutely love that quote as one to remember for the exam. Dadlessness, dysfunction and divorce. I think it's a really nice little snappy line to get in there to show that you understand the key features of new right ideology. Now we go into as a consequence. So as a consequence is one of those fantastic little phrases that shows the examiner that you are able to analyse. As a consequence, more boys grow up without a male role model, as these fathers know the state will provide for their children if they do not. The lack of male authority is also responsible for a rising crime rate and gangs, according to the new right. There I am also applying synoptic knowledge because I am using my knowledge of the new right and right realism from the crime section, paper 3, and applying it successfully here. However, always my key little word to show the examiner that now I am moving on to my evaluation or criticism of the new right. The new right are often criticised for ignoring social policies that actually strengthen the nuclear family, such as tax breaks for married couples introduced under Cameron's Conservative government. I think students are quite often reluctant to include examples within evaluation, but just like within the main body of your essay, examples strengthen your argument. Examples like the one we've applied here also strengthen your evaluation. Furthermore, I also think students are quite often reluctant to add more than one piece of evaluation. But if you have got an argument like the new right in front of you, who really do have such big opinions about social policy and the welfare state, then it is absolutely fine to criticise with more than one point to expand on your evaluation. They've also been criticised for labelling single parents as welfare scroungers, where in fact most want to work but find it difficult to find jobs that are flexible enough so they can balance work and childcare. Moving on then. So the next paragraph starts with functionalism. And again, I think functionalism is really the natural progression in a social policy essay from the new right, because whilst they do take a more right-wing political approach, they do tend to be a little bit more lenient and liberal in their views of welfare. So some similar views to the new right, some slightly different views. Functionalists such as Fletcher take a much more positive view about the role and impact of social policy on families, so long as it is not too radical. They argue that in many cases, social policy can benefit all members of a nuclear family unit and therefore strengthen society too. Note how there I have specifically mentioned the nuclear family, because as we know, functionalists are not going to be supportive of social policy that is going to create too much family diversity. So just making sure you're more specific in mentioning things like the type of family will strengthen your argument. The NHS is an excellent example of this, as functionalists would argue this ensures all families have access to medical care and therefore can continue to carry out their individual roles. So you've got a specific example there of the NHS. It's a great one to remember for the exam. You could even talk about some of the universalistic principles of the NHS, that it is available to everyone from the cradle to the grave. However, signposting again that we are now evaluating functionalism. Functionalists can be accused of taking a rose-tinted view and ignore the fact that social policy can actually be harmful to family life, as argued by Donzelot, who views these laws simply as a way of the state exerting too much control over families. What you've got there is another example of top-band evaluation, because what I haven't done is just stop at the idea of rose-tinted view, which many students do. What I've actually done is created debate through one sociologist, functionalist, and another Donzelot. And that really is the highest form of evaluation that you can provide for the examiner. Although Marxists agree with functionalists that social policy has a significant impact on family life, they do not see this as positive. Really would recommend doing that at the start of your paragraphs where you can. It helps your argument to flow, and it also shows that you've got a more sophisticated sociological understanding, in that you understand there are similarities between theoretical frameworks, even if it seems they are opposed on everything. Marxists view the fundamental purpose of social policy as yet another way for the government and ruling class to exert their control over the working class and ensure families remain nuclear, as this benefits capitalism through the reproduction of the next generation of workers. So you've just got your standard Marxist theory there that you are going to make sure you learn off by heart for any exam question where Marxism needs to be applied. We'll apply it more specifically now to social policy. Marxists also claim that social policy such as National Health Service simply ensures that workers go back to the capitalist workplace as quickly as possible. However, Marxists ignore the many welfare policies that have undoubtedly improved working class lives through initiatives such as council housing. Okay, so I'm using the NHS here as a negative, turning it on its head from the last paragraph to show I understand Marxism theory. But what I also am doing in my evaluation is ensuring I provide an example in the form of council housing. So I'm not just giving that more generic evaluation that Marxists ignore positive welfare policies. I've actually provided specific evidence of a social policy that will have helped, countless working class families. Radical feminists believe that social policy simply reinforces patriarchal ideas about gender roles within a nuclear family. For example, many policies assume that husbands are the main wage earners and that wives are the financial dependents. Note there, I've also been quite specific about the type of feminist that I'm referring to. I'm not just making sure that feminists are this one homogenous group. I am being specific that radical feminists believe this. Leonard argues that although maternity leave policies benefit women, they also reinforce patriarchy in the family by encouraging the assumption that the care of infants is the responsibility of mothers rather than fathers. So I've supported it with a specific radical feminist sociologist there as well. However, more contemporary social policies offer generous paternity leave options and even give couples the choice of splitting parental leave, making this more equal for both sexes. Here I'm actually addressing that today part of the question, aren't I? By showing the examiner that I have the most up-to-date social policy knowledge available to me in understanding how there has been an evolution of maternity and paternity leave within the UK. Furthermore, liberal feminists point towards the many positive social policy laws, such as contemporary divorce law, which grants both parties equal rights to divorce and allows women to leave unhappy marriages. Note in my evaluation there, I have used one branch of feminism to evaluate another branch of feminism, which just reinforces that idea that we understand feminism is a large theoretical framework and there are lots of different ideas within that. So to use one theory to evaluate another theory of feminism really does show higher level thinking when it comes to evaluation. In conclusion, social policy clearly has a significant impact on family life. And many contemporary examples, such as child benefit and shared paternity leave, prove that this can have a profoundly positive impact on families in the UK. So I'm addressing the today part of the question, I'm adding the most contemporary examples I can that I think are the most significant, and I'm ultimately answering the actual question without using the word I in terms of I believe this, I'm doing it more from an objective sociological viewpoint. So section B, topic B1, beliefs in society. Outline and explain 2 reasons for the existence of cults in modern society. Reminder for you, as a 10 marker, you will be spending around about 15 minutes completing this question. You need to be writing 2 separate peel paragraphs, no need for evaluation. This question is looking for that detailed explanation and analysis, and ensuring that both of your reasons are very different from each other. So if we just have a look at the key terms in the question there then, it's asking us to outline and explain 2 reasons for the existence of cults. So why cults have emerged as a new type of religious movement. And that term cult, although there isn't one specific definition that we need to use in the exam, Bruce defines it as a sort of loosely knit group organised around some common themes and interests. But they lack rules, they lack structure, they lack hierarchy, and it's definitely not an exclusive belief system. It's much more fluid than that. Examples of cults might be something like UFO spotters. So we're trying to understand why people might have moved from traditional religious beliefs like Christianity to these loose knit kind of groups of common believers or followers of a specific movement. So to do that, we might want to think about the types of people that are more likely to be attracted to cults, or we might want to think about the kind of changes in modern society that might lead people to want to join a more loose-knit type organisation of belief. Or we might want to look at the types of things cults offer their members as opposed to traditional beliefs. Let's have a look at a mark scheme. So if we have a look on that 8 to 10 mark level descriptor, 2 reasons for the emergence of cults in modern society with good knowledge in both points. And as always, good knowledge means we are applying as many key concepts as possible, we are referring to specific sociologists, and we are possibly even managing to get some theoretical knowledge in there as well. Analysis will be detailed and developed in both points. Remember as well, analysis does not mean description. We are not just going to write everything we know about cults. We are going to make sure that we link all of our ideas back to the emergence and use those lovely key terms like this means that, this therefore shows, this leads to, which shows the examiner we are creating some sort of chain of reasoning in our ideas. Note also, there's nothing about evaluation in that top band, so unless you really want to, maybe you're struggling with your analysis, you might chuck in a sentence or 2 of criticism, but we do not need to do that for 10 marks. And also, time is so tight on this exam paper. Don't apply the knowledge that you don't need to. Stick to what is on the mark scheme. There's an example there for you. Cults have developed in response to the fast-paced nature of postmodern society. For example, audience cults place few demands on their members and offer this worldly benefits, which is appealing to an individualistic consumer culture. So in that sentence, you can see some theory in the form of postmodernity. You can see some key concepts such as audience cults, and then you can also see the analysis about why these types of cults would be more appealing to people because they offer this worldly benefits, which is more appealing to people when we live in this postmodern society. If we have a look at the next band down then, the 4 to 7 marks, the only real difference there is you might have only been able to apply 1 reason with some good knowledge, or you might have been able to apply 2 reasons, but the knowledge there might just only be reasonable, not good. An analysis might not be through the whole answer. Let's have a look at a top band answer. So let's have a look at a top band answer. 1 reason for the existence of cults in modern society is due to the fast-paced nature of postmodern life, which means many religious or spiritual people are too busy to attend a formal church organisation regularly. Cults are often a more loose-knit religious organisation that expect or demand full commitment from their followers. Additionally, the practice of a cult may be much more individual, which may be appealing to members who cannot commit to mass worship or ceremonies like they would in a church. An example of this may be groups that practice transcendental meditation, which helps their followers find inner peace and calm, but can be completed in the privacy of their own home. This means that they rarely have a place of worship, require less regular attendance, and place very few demands on their members. This may be a significant factor in a postmodern society on choosing a religious organisation, as people are more likely to work longer hours than in the past and have access to more types of distractions from televisions to the internet. This low commitment is often preferable. So I really think the clue for this paragraph came from the last two words in question 4, which are modern society. And they are two words that you see in an awful lot of questions on AQA sociology. So whenever you see those two words, think about whether you can, like I have in this paragraph, apply some of the features of postmodern life and some postmodern theory. So when it comes to postmodernity, here we are arguing that we are now more individualistic in our own ideas about life in general, but also here applying that to religious beliefs. And therefore, we want a belief system that matches our new lifestyle. And cults are more likely to match that lifestyle than a church. Please also note in this paragraph the use of transcendental meditation. Again, that is a really good example to remember for the beliefs exam. It is the perfect example of a new type of belief system whereby people are practicing transcendental meditation to possibly feel spirituality, but whilst also making their own lives better and being able to do so whenever they want and wherever they want. It's a great example for spiritual shopping. It's a great example for new religious movements in general. Please also note the use of those link kind of phrases that I mentioned on the mark scheme to show analysis. So here you can see things like "this means that" being applied to ensure the examiner knows that I am telling you about the consequences of this new type of belief. You can also see it further on when it says "this may be a significant factor," because again, I am able to explain why this is so important when we are studying the existence of cults in modern society. Let's have a look at the second point. Another reason cults may exist in modern society is due to the individualistic and consumer nature of them compared to other religious organisations. In postmodern society, people may prefer to take a pick and mix approach to religion, consuming spirituality when they want to and where suits their individual needs. Stark and Bainbridge identified a client cult that has emerged in society, whereby followers are provided with a service from professionals associated with a cultic movement. This may help them to cope with experiences of relative deprivation in society today. People may feel they are lacking something emotionally or spiritually. Therefore, cults may offer individuals this worldly benefits, like better health, which is more appealing to postmodern consumers of belief than more traditional otherworldly benefits such as heaven that are not accessible straight away. So we're taking another reason here from the postmodern perspective to explain why cults may be emerging in modern society, and we are going for a specific reason mentioned by Stark and Bainbridge, this use of the term client cult, which basically refers to cults existing due to the nature of postmodern society where people wish to literally purchase a religion that suits their needs. You've also got the term relative deprivation there. So here we are referring to those middle class religious consumers in society who may live in a lovely big house, drive a great car, have a really great career, but actually still feel like something is missing from their lives. So they seek spirituality. And they probably don't want to have the commitment of joining something like a church, so instead they tend to be drawn in more towards a cult-like movement, which may offer them, you see the term there, this worldly benefits, i.e. it offers them some immediate benefits to being a member of that organisation. So that might be promises of performing better at work, being happier in your marriage, or being healthier, as opposed to what we refer to there as other worldly benefits, which are offered within more traditional religious beliefs such as Christianity, which is the idea of things like heaven when you die. That tends to be more appealing to those who are suffering on earth, maybe more likely to be appealing to the materially deprived. Read item C and answer the question that follows. Item C. Some sociologists argue religion can bring about change in society. For example, Weber believes religion acted as a catalyst for capitalism. Others view religion as enabling social and political change. Applying material from item C, analyse 2 ways religion may act as a force of change in society. 10 marks. So, as always, this is a 10 marker, so we will be allocating 15 minutes to reading the item, interpreting the item, and constructing 2 PhET paragraphs. Other reminders, as this is an item 10 mark answer, we need to ensure that both of our points are selected carefully from hooks within item C. So even if you can think of other ideas to argue that religion may be a force of change in society, you have to stick to the hook items within this question question type to ensure that you are able to get to the top of band 2 or the very top band of 8 to 10 marks. And the best way to do that is to just make sure that both of your paragraphs start with the sentence as shown in item C, and you provide a quote specifically from the item to support that. So if we have a look at this specific item to see the kind of hooks that we might want to refer to in our answer, you can see in that second sentence where it says, for example, Weber believes religion acted as a catalyst for capitalism. Hopefully, in an exam situation, that would help you to remember some of that theory that Weber put forward regarding Calvinism and the ways that religion may have been one of the features that led to capitalism emerging in modern Europe. The second sentence there then is where you should be finding your second hook from. Very typical within an AQA item like this to have two separate sentences with two separate hooks. And it said, others view religion as enabling social and political change. So here, the specific sociologist has not been mentioned for you. That means there are a couple that you can choose from. However, you need to make sure the sociologist that you do choose argue that religion is associated in some way to political reform, maybe protest, maybe changing laws in society. So as a reminder again, I really would suggest that when you are trying to ensure that you are sticking to your two hooks in the item on these 10 markers, highlight the two ideas that you would use on your exam paper. Here, that would be Weber, and here that would be social and political change. And then that will ensure that as you construct your PhET paragraph, you are sticking very, very closely to the item at all times. I did mention evaluation. I would advise doing that if possible, and if you've got the time to on an item 10-mark question. Here, that evaluation might look like a specific criticism of the sociologist you have mentioned, but also that evaluation might look like the other side of the argument here, and that would be that religion does not act as a force for change in society. Actually, religion may be a conservative force in society or prevent social change. So there you might draw upon some of your theoretical knowledge like Marxism or feminism. Let's have a look at a mark scheme. So as usual, we can see on that 8 to 10 mark level descriptor that in order to get into the top band, both of our ways need to be clearly developed from the item. So we're going to refer to the item and we're going to specifically quote from it in order to argue religion acts as a force for change in society. Both of those have to have good knowledge. So although you are taking the idea of Weber and capitalism from the item, you are obviously then developing that with your own sociological knowledge. So you will be giving some ideas about the Calvinist belief in general. Maybe you will providing some examples of how some specific Calvinist beliefs, maybe something like the idea of the elect or salvation panic, are actually part of Weber's wider argument of how capitalism emerged. Analysis will be detailed and developed in both points. Remember, that means we are not just going to describe Weber's theory, for example, in that first paragraph. So it's very, very tempting when it comes to looking at religious organisations like Calvinism to just provide almost a narrative account of those beliefs. You've got to make sure that you select the beliefs that help us to argue the point that religion is a catalyst or helps to encourage the development of capitalism in society. Exactly the same when it comes to the other point with regards to social protest. Don't just, for example, if you decide to go down the Martin Luther King route, don't just write a narrative account of who Martin Luther King is. Stick directly to the item and the question and how the actions of people like Martin Luther King led to change emerging in society. And evaluation of both of those points there as well. So providing the criticism, maybe with regards to Weber, how his study is limited, maybe with regard to protest, how actually in other situations religion has acted as a conservative force keeping society the same. There's an example there for you as well of a top band type answer, just a brief sentence of the kind of thing we would be looking for. Weber argued distinctive Calvinist beliefs such as predestination led to followers carrying out actions that may have led to an economic change in society. The emergence of capitalism. For example, believers suffered salvation panic, causing them to work as hard as they could to convince themselves they were an elect. So what you can see I've done there is exactly what we were just arguing about being analytical over descriptive. I've not gone into loads of details about what predestination means. I've not talked about the idea of salvation panic in a great amount of detail. What I have done is selected the specific beliefs of Calvinism that lead to economic change. So I've made sure that I am answering that question at all times. Again, as usual, the difference between the 8 to 10 marker and the 4 to 7 mark band is the ability for you to be able to develop both of your points in good analytical style or with good knowledge, or the ability of you to only be able to do this one time instead of in both of your paragraphs. So let's have a look what a top band answer would look like. One way that religion may act as a force for change in society, as shown in item A, is as a catalyst for capitalism. Weber argued that one of the reasons modern capitalism emerged was because of a religious ideology called Calvinism. According to Weber, Calvinism possessed many of the features required for an economic change from feudalism to capitalism because of some of the more unusual religious beliefs followers held. For example, Calvinists believed in predestination, which meant that God had already decided who would enter heaven, regardless of how one lived their life. According to Weber, this sent believers into a salvation panic, whereby they looked for any signs that God may be showing them that they are one of the elect destined for heaven by being successful economically. This led to followers working extremely hard and therefore making healthy profits, which they reinvested back into their businesses, a key feature of capitalism. However, one may argue that this does not prove that capitalism emerged as a consequence of religious belief, as Calvinism was widely found in Scotland and capitalism did not fully develop there until much later. So hopefully you can see in that first paragraph then, we grab something from the item straight away, in this case, catalyst for capitalism, and then we go straight into Weber's argument. And hopefully you can also see there then that we are not just giving a full narrative account of what Weber believes about Calvinism. What we are doing is picking and choosing the features of Calvinism that help us to understand how religion may act as a force for change. And we are basically arguing that Weber's study of Calvinism led him to believe that there were certain quite unusual beliefs associated with this branch of Christianity that led to the perfect conditions for capitalism to arise. So you've got examples there like predestination, you've got examples there like salvation panic, which basically led to followers constantly trying to find some sort of sign or approval from God that they were one of the elect and that they would be going to heaven. You can also see phrases there like this led to. I've talked about this previously, but it's just such a great way to show the examiner that you are analysing what you are talking about. You are analysing these key concepts rather than just describing them. You're explaining the consequences of them for society, and in this case, for bringing about a change in society. Where students sometimes go a bit wrong with Calvinism is they fail to make the distinct link about what the change in society is. So if you ever are talking about Weber, if you ever are talking about Calvinism, make sure that you do make it crystal clear to the examiner that you understand the change is this speeding up or introduction of capitalism. Okay, it's one of the many factors that may have led to capitalism emerging in Western Europe. Also, try not to make the mistake that some sociologists do in the exam by claiming that Weber was a Calvinist. Absolutely not the case at all. He is the sociologist, one of our founding fathers of sociology actually, who is using Calvinism as a belief system to prove his point about capitalism. Finally, hopefully you can see the evaluation is crystal clear there, the term being however, that shows the examiner that we are now moving on to criticism, and here we are using the idea that actually we cannot apply Weber's ideas about Calvinism and the emergence of capitalism to all areas of Western and modern Europe, and the example there is Scotland, where there was a larger proportion of Calvinists, but capitalism did not emerge till much later. So our second point then, another way that religion may act as a force for change is through social change, as shown in item A. Bruce identified the Black civil rights movement in the USA as a clear example of how religious beliefs and organisations can be successful in promoting social change and justice. This is because figures such as Martin Luther King used religious language from the Bible and used religious buildings to deliver his speeches. This, according to Bruce, prompted change such as equality laws in the USA, as it proved to white Christians that if they were truly following God's will, they would not be supporting segregation and would instead love thy neighbour. However, Bruce also recognises this is not always a successful way to implement change, as other religious organisations have been much less influential, such as the New Christian Right in America, who have failed to make the USA as conservative as they wished. So once again, clear reference to the item in the very first sentence, and then a second point about a different way that religion may enact change in society. This time's Bruce's idea regarding Christian characters like Martin Luther King being able to use religious belief as a way to change society. Also there, you've got the same sort of structure for your criticism, however, introducing that criticism, and it's an unusual one because Bruce is actually kind of criticising his own theory criteria here by saying it doesn't always work this way. There has to be the right conditions. There has to be a group of people, in the case of Martin Luther King, not only Christian supporters, but also politicians and the elite in society who are on board with implementing that change. Just also mention the New Christian Right at the end there, and I would really recommend doing some research and some reading on that political Christian group, as they do have a little bit more influence in American politics these days, and they're just a really fantastic example to use in the exam of ways that we might argue Christianity is still influential in the Western world, and also the way that religion can be influenced and connected to politics as well. Read item D and answer the question that follows. Item D. Many sociologists, such as functionalists, argue that religion is a vital part of society helping to maintain social order. Some sociologists disagree and argue that religion merely acts as a tool of oppression. Others argue religion's functions are changing. Applying material from item D and your own knowledge, evaluate the view that religion still performs positive functions for society today. 20 marks. Reminder, as always, that you are going to spend around about 30 minutes answering this question. That includes time taken to read the item and also ideally time for you to construct a short plan as well. This is definitely the question on paper 2 that students tend to underperform on, and that might be a consequence of students finding the knowledge quite tricky, but I actually think more likely is a consequence of the fact that it's the last question on the paper. You're running out of steam having answered all of those mini essays and the longer essay in families, and therefore, just once again, it is potentially worth considering before you go into the exam whether it is better for you to attempt these 20 markers at the beginning and then have a go at the 10 markers afterwards. However you decide to do it though, or whatever order you decide to do it in, there are certain things that we need to consider when looking at these 20 markers. So once again, the item is there for you to use as stimulus. It's a great idea if you can refer to it a couple of times in the essay, in the same way that we've referred to the item in 10 markers with an item, but we're not just relying on you having those hooks this time. In fact, as it says in the question there, and your own knowledge, so you must bring in some of your own knowledge as well as ideas within the hook. The other thing the 20 markers all have in common is that word evaluate in the question as well. So because we've got the term evaluate, we know that we are creating a critical essay. Sometimes that will be in the form of a two-sided essay. Sometimes, like the essay that you've got in front of you here, that will be an essay where you are creating debate between a number of theoretical perspectives. The essay is always ideally going to be around about 4 peely paragraphs long, so that's point, evidence, explain, link, evaluation, and with a short conclusion at the bottom. As I've said previously in other walkthroughs, my recommendation would not be to include an introduction, certainly not any sort of lengthy introduction, because you just will not have the time, and it's not a place in the essay where the examiner is going to be able to find much to credit you for. So much better, in my opinion, from an examiner's perspective, to get straight into the main body of your essay, but just to provide a short conclusion at the end, meaning you can get into that top band. So just to quickly discuss evaluation in a little bit more detail, we do need to make sure we don't fall into that trap of just providing juxtaposition evaluation. So just sort of flinging your paragraphs from one idea to the next, hoping that that's creating a little bit of debate. What we actually want to do is make sure on the end of every single paragraph, we go back to the point that we've made, to the sociologist, to the example that we provided, and we critique it specifically. Just to give you an idea of how that might work within this topic, if I was writing an argument about Marx's view that religion is the opium of the masses, my specific criticism of Marxism would not necessarily just be an argument from functionalism. To create some evaluation at the end of my paragraph, I might want to argue also that Marx's view is not really relevant in a postmodern society where religion has changed and we have become powerful consumers, powerful spiritual shoppers, which means that we are less likely to be oppressed by the beliefs that we hold. And finally, just to go through a couple of the other key terms within that question then, does argue that religion is still performing positive functions for society. I really would recommend any time you ever see the term functions in any of your sociology essays to think about theory straight away. Functionalism is probably the theoretical viewpoint that's going to pop into your head when you see the word functions, but it's about creating argument between the consensus and the conflict sociologists. So make sure that when you're planning out your answer, you do have a range of perspectives covered. The typical kind of clues that you're looking for are totally in that item there. So functionalists are specifically mentioned, but then you've got ideas like religion merely acts as a tool of oppression. So hopefully that would help you to think about your conflict perspectives, i.e. feminism and Marxism. You've then also got that helpful sentence on the end. Others argue religion's functions are changing. Again, that should hopefully just jog your memory to think about which type of theory would argue religion is changing. Oh, that must be something like a postmodern argument, and then you'll feel more confident in applying that knowledge in the exam, knowing basically from the item that those are the sort of ideas that the exam board are going to be wanting to see. So let's have a look at the mark scheme. So if we have a look at the 17 to 20 mark level descriptors then, and this is a really challenging band to get your essay to fall into. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's also worth noting that if you do drop a band and go into that 13 to 16 marks, then as long as you are performing at the top of that, getting the 15, 16 marks on your 20 markers, you certainly can still get an A grade most years on AQA Sociology. Obviously, that is dependent on the grade boundaries, which do alter from year to year. So what are we looking at for 17 to 20 marks? Well, knowledge is almost always detailed, conceptual and analytical. That basically means you construct a full sociological essay, and within that essay, your knowledge is always supported by key sociological concepts, by specific contemporary examples, sociologists, theory. So you're just making sure that you never make a point without backing it up or supporting it. And also, when you make a point, it is analytical, i.e. you do not drift off into just describing sociology. You show how one event leads to another event. Explanation and evaluation are highly relevant. So this might mean that you are carefully selecting the examples that you apply. You are carefully choosing the evaluation you apply to make sure that it is specifically tailored to the point that you have made, but that also you cover a range of theoretical perspectives. So you don't, for example, just always use Marxism to critique functionalism. You make sure that you use a range of theoretical ideas. So maybe you draw upon examples from feminism as well. Maybe you're able to get a bit of neo-Marxism in there. Maybe you're able to think about postmodernity as well. So you're giving the examiner a range of different evaluative points. And the real difference then when it comes to that 13 to 16 mark band is that you will be doing a lot of the same things. You will still be constructing a full essay. However, you might just not have the full theoretical range of ideas or the full sociological range of ideas. It might be that you either have great range, i.e. lots of ideas that you don't fully explain or fully analyse, maybe 5 or 6 ideas, or you might have really good depth to your knowledge that's a little bit more limited. So it might be that you are only actually able to think about 2 or 3 or 4 ideas, but within those ideas you provide a fantastic level of detail in your response. And that would really come through using the PhET structure that we've talked about previously. You're still required to have evaluation for the 13 to 16 marks as well, so there's got to be some debate created there. That evaluation is just less likely to be completely tailored to the point that you have made in each of your paragraphs. And then just finally, the 9 to 12 mark band, where a lot of students end up finding themselves in the exam, is usually a consequence of the fact that you've not really planned your answer, so you're not forming so much of a sociological essay or argument. Quite often, because you haven't planned effectively, you start drifting off into knowledge that doesn't specifically answer the question. It might be that your answer is a little bit more descriptive, where you start just sort of telling the examiner about key concepts, but you aren't able to make that link clearly back to the question that you have been given. So let's apply everything we've just talked about in the 17 to 20 mark level descriptors, and let's have a look at a model answer. Parsons argues that modern religion helps people in society to answer life's ultimate questions and also provides meaning. For example, when someone dies, Parsons argues that a religious funeral is an essential tool in helping society to continue to function very quickly. The idea of heaven and also the funeral service allows loved ones to come together and be supportive as part of the community. And it also helps people to process death, which could be extremely dysfunctional for society to lose one of its members. Therefore, this suggests that religion provides comfort in times of need, and this comfort keeps social cohesion protected in society. However, recent analysis of church attendance figures suggests that only around 5% of the population are now regularly attending Christian services, meaning that functionalists may exaggerate the positive impact of religion today. So let's take a look at this paragraph with regards to the structure, because it is the way that I would suggest you structure all of your paragraphs if possible. We start off there by mentioning a theory, which is also the theory mentioned in the item. I would always suggest going down that route. The first theory in the item, or the first point mentioned in the item, go within your first paragraph. So we mention functionalism as the theory, and we talk about where that is noted in item A. What we then do then is add our own knowledge. So we've got explanation about the organic analogy, and then a specific sociologist, Parsons, to support functionalist views on religion acting as part of this wider organic analogy, where it is one of the social structures, an agent of secondary socialisation that helps the rest of society to function. Also, though, note how we are discussing modern religion when it comes to Parsons. We are not just focusing on someone like Durkheim, and that relates to the fact that in the question it actually says positive functions for society today. So we've made sure that our answer focuses on that, a more contemporary functionalist sociologist. We then go into an example of the type of religious service that might provide this positive function for society. So here you could use wedding, I've gone with funeral, just to kind of make the point to the examiner that in a functionalist view, death could be exceptionally chaotic for a society. And as we know, functionalists like society to be harmonious, like society to be based on a value consensus. We then go into therefore, and therefore is that link bit of the paragraph that's going back to make sure the examiner knows that you are staying focused and answering the question, saying actually yes, religion does perform a positive function, and the positive function that we are identifying is the fact that it provides social cohesion that is also related to social solidarity in times of need. Now, functionalists don't need to be religious themselves to believe this. They don't really necessarily need to care about religious belief at all. All they care about is the function that religion is serving for society. And here, that is clearly positive, because in times of what could be great stress, religion unites people, brings people together. Then we've got that classic word, however, to show the examiner that we are now critiquing our specific point here, and we are actually suggesting that if we look at Christian church attendance figures, only 5% of the population are regularly attending, and that means how can religion still be performing all of these positive functions if people aren't going to church? And I would recommend learning that sentence around church attendance figures and applying it in as many essays as you possibly can where you are trying to discuss the significance, the importance, the relevance of religion in today's society. Of course, if we wanted to go further in our analysis, we could actually evaluate church attendance figures, because Grace Davey obviously argues that members of society now are more likely to be involved with believing without belonging, i.e. religion has become privatised, and you don't need to go to church in order to feel the positive functions religion might be serving for society. Moving on then to the next paragraph. Although Marxists agree with functionalists that religion is a significant feature of life, they argue that religion does not perform positive functions for society or individuals, and rather acts as a tool of oppression, as shown in item A, maintaining the status quo of the elite. Now, in that first sentence, I want to highlight something that's really important. You are showing the examiner in that first sentence that you have got an excellent overall sociological knowledge, because you understand sociological theory. So what you're essentially doing in that sentence is showing the examiner that you understand that despite the fact Marxists and functionalists could appear on the surface to disagree on everything in society, there actually are some areas of commonality between the two theorists, and that is in how they view society as a whole as a structural theory. So even though functionalists view religion as a positive structure, Marxists still view religion as a structure, just as one that's negative. So they argue religion does not perform these positive functions, instead it acts as a tool of oppression. And that's the reference as well to the item. You are showing the examiner that where the sociological argument hasn't been identified, you understand where it's coming from. For example, Marxists argue that religion is the opium of the masses, meaning that it dulls the pain and suffering experienced by working class followers due to capitalism for short periods of time, through promises of an afterlife. Marxists believe that the Catholic Church therefore does not serve positive functions today, but merely brainwashes the proletariat to accept their low status in society and instructs them not to rebel, as supported by quotes such as, "Pleasant to the meek, for they will inherit the earth." However, neo-Marxists claim that religion can in fact have dual character and have a positive effect on believers, and consider the role religion played in liberating the poor in Latin America through the active role of priests. So again, there's that use of an example once you've made your point about Marxism. We're using the quote opium of the masses, which if you ever talk about Marxist ideology and religion, I think you've got to get in there. It's that idea that religion acts as a drug. Comparing religion to something like heroin has the same sort of effect on its followers. It's addictive. It keeps you sleepy. It's bad for your health, but might give you a short-term kick. And what we then do is further support that with a quote from the Bible, "Pleasant are the meek, for they will inherit the earth," which Marxists are basically saying proves the point that the Bible as a scripture is telling people, telling working class followers, telling the proletariat not to have a revolution, not to change the status quo of capitalism, because they are the ones that will be rewarded in the afterlife, which Marxists view as very convenient for the ruling class who, are able to enjoy the riches on earth. I'd like to also point out the evaluation there then. Again, when you come to using Marxism on an essay question for beliefs, very often the highest band is going to be awarded to those students who can evaluate Marxist theory with neo-Marxist theory. Neo just meaning new, more contemporary Marxist theory. And here we are thinking about that liberation theology within the last sort of 30 to 40 years, where sociologists believe, neo-Marxists believe, that religion has had the opposite effect and has in fact for some working class people been able to help redistribute the wealth within that society. Okay, let's carry on. Feminists also view religion as a negative structure today, as they argue it acts as a form of patriarchal oppression. Armstrong argues that rather than performing positive functions, religion reinforces gender stereotypes in a number of ways. For example, within Islam, men and women are separated during prayer, and women are unable to touch the holy book whilst menstruating. Within the Bible, women are identified as mothers or virgins, which Armstrong argues suggests that women should not be sexualised. Women are also less likely and sometimes unable to occupy high-status roles within religious hierarchies, limiting their influence and power, known to feminists as a stained glass ceiling. However, Woodhead disagrees and argues that religion can actually be linked to feminism, as within Islam the hijab enables some women to feel liberated. So once again, in that first sentence, we are identifying that feminism is similar to Marxism. So we're continuing this argument linked to the question of religion forming positive functions. But here we are saying feminists agree with Marxism that religion does not perform negative functions, but they argue that it does so in a different way. This time we're not talking about hierarchical oppression between the ruling class and the working class. Here we are talking about the patriarchy. Hopefully you're familiar with Armstrong's argument that religion actually acts as a patriarchal institution in a number of ways. So, I could have chosen religious scriptures, I could have chosen religious institutions, I could have chosen religious customs and traditions. Here we've gone for an example from Islam and an example from the Bible. And I think where possible, if you can take a more sort of global view of religion, not just focus every single time on Western religion or, alternatively Eastern religion, and try to take examples from across the board. I also, though, in my evaluation here, just like with my Marxism, I do that higher end evaluation where I'm using one feminist argument to evaluate another feminist argument. So Woodhead actually disagrees with Armstrong, as in some cases Woodhead views religion as a form of religious feminism. The hijab is a great example of that, where Woodhead highlights that actually for some Muslim women, the hijab is a powerful tool. It's certainly not something that makes them feel oppressed. Postmodernists would argue that religion actually performs many positive functions today for different believers. As religion has become more personalised, followers are able to pick and choose a religion that best suits their individual needs. For example, religious believers are now part of an active religious marketplace where they can act as spiritual shoppers, tailoring a belief to match their current needs, which is very positive. For example, if people feel like they are struggling with the demands of modern life, that they may try something like transcendental meditation for a while to connect spiritually and make their lives happier. However, one could also argue that this simply strengthens the idea of religion losing all influence in society, as these types of movements are often very short-lived. So, in my essay, I have covered the structural theories, through functionalism, feminism and Marxism. I have also identified the structural theories, like functionalism, that view religion as still having a positive function. I've then viewed the structural theories that are conflict, that view religion as performing a negative function in society. Now, the logical movement is to go into looking at a non-structural sociological theory, i.e. postmodernity, and that really does just ensure, going back to the Marx scheme, that we have hit the breadth, the range of ideas that the examiners are looking at to get into that top band. And the structure here is very similar to all of the other paragraphs. We provide our point about postmodernity. And again, postmodernity is a great theory to always chuck in at the end because it really is all about the individual. So here we're arguing, yes, religion can perform positive functions today for believers, but that really depends on the individual experience of that believer. So we talk about these ideas about religion becoming more of a pick and mix marketplace where people are spiritual shoppers, i.e. we go out into a shopping centre full of religious beliefs, metaphorically, and we choose the one that best suits our needs. And again, there's an example to support that. We're basically talking about those that feel, relatively deprived spiritually, when we're talking about followers who may decide to take up something like transcendental meditation because there's just something missing in their lives. We've got our criticism as well of postmodernity, i.e. we're arguing here that actually, is this really religion changing and being a positive experience of people, or is this actually just religion declining? Because these movements are faddish, they're short-lived, there's no real long-term commitment. I also think postmodernity is a very important theory to consider within this essay because, remembering again, there is that key word at the end of the question that asks you about religion today. And I personally feel that whenever possible, if the question asks you about religion today, you need to refer to postmodernity if you can at some point. Let's have a look at the short conclusion. In conclusion, it is clear that religion still plays an important role in society, and it appears this is now adapting to meet individual needs in a post-modern society, which may be a positive trend. So I've decided to go with postmodernity as my strongest argument in the conclusion, again, mainly because I am addressing that today section of the question, and also I am able to make my argument about religion still having positive functions for society without having to take a structural viewpoint.
Well done, lovelies. I'm really, really proud of all of your hard work.